sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast, where we talk about everything leadership, management, organizational culture, and thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. I have a bit of a treat for you today. The first order of business is that I'm your only host today. Mike, aka my father, won't be here today, but in his replacement, and I'm sure he'll be pleased with this, we have Akpene Torku Sims, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. I've been looking forward to this podcast for quite some time now when we scheduled this, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself and, you know, the work that she does with leaders and beyond. So, Akpene, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ethan, for having me. I have been looking forward to this as well. We connected on LinkedIn several months ago, and we just really got on a really good wavelength. So a little bit about myself. I am a business coach and consultant. I also do teachings and trainings. I work with entrepreneurs, small business, and leadership, and people in leadership. And my goal is to clear the chaotic clutter that goes on in people's head and bring them to a realization or an actualization of their vision and goals. So that's my background. I had about 7 years in human resources. I was with an organization which I built the human resources department from the ground up. So that was kind of a trial by fire, if you will. And doing process management, project management. And I just really love to see people operating in their full potential and their gifts, their callings, their goals. I feel like that when people are doing that, it's better for society as a whole. And I found that I was good at it, so I just went into it.
Well, I can tell from our conversation so far, you are really good at this. And, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you today is just, for one, I think we have many overlapping interests. Mm-hmm. And I love how you put it there that, you know, your mission and your goal and your ethos is really helping people reach their full potential. Yeah. But you're talking about them reaching their full potential in the context of that is better for society. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's a terrific top level goal and something I really align with, right? We're not only helping people kind of get their slice of the cake, but when people are performing at their highest level, reaching that potential, I mean, society benefits from that. And I really, truly believe that. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. One of my taglines is be a boss, build your empire, and leave a legacy.
I love it.
And I really believe in that progression. As you become more in control of yourself and in control of your sphere of influence, you widen it, and then you just leave parts of you all around, and good parts of you to better the people around you. So yeah, absolutely.
That's absolutely right. Again, this podcast called Managing with Mind and Heart, and it just sounds like the work that you do is really, heart-centered as well as head-centered. And yeah. I want to get into that today. But before we go there, yeah, I have to ask you, Akpene, talk to me a little bit about archery. From my understanding, you're an archer. You enjoy the sport, and I don't meet a lot of people that are into archery.
I love archery. I picked it up. I literally woke up one day and I said, I want to try archery. No rhyme or reason for that. I never watched the Hunger Games. That's what people always ask me. I didn't like the storyline of like kids killing kids. I'm like, I'm going to step away from that. I was more like, Merida from Brave. one of the lesser known Disney movies. I was like, I like that one. And so I signed up for lessons just to see if I could do it. And so they taught me the framework and all that stuff, and I started shooting. And my instructor was like, "You have a natural talent." I was like, "Really? I do?" Because I felt like I wasn't hitting where I wanted to be. He goes, "Most people don't pick up the bow and arrow and actually hit the target. I mean, let alone the bullseye." And I hit the bullseye a couple of times. So I started training. I started practicing, and it was just a nice release of tension. I remember after a board meeting I had one time, I went to the archery range, and it was just wonderful. It was wonderful because it wasn't a great board meeting. So it is a release of tension, it's exercise, and I just find that there's a lot of I get a lot of analogies from things in life, and in archery is definitely one of them. You have everything about your goals and what you have to do to reach your goals. And I actually have a story, if I can tell that, about the archery.
I would love that, please.
So I went to the archery range and I was practicing for well over a year, and you have people that you get to know, and you start making friends and such. And then I noticed that there's this one person who was training, kind of like an instructor or a private tutor, if you will, for several archers. And he was very standoffish. And people were like, "Yeah, he knows his stuff, but he knows his stuff." So after 8 or 9 months, we were going to get our arrows after we were done shitting around. And he said, "I've been watching you, and you have gotten really, really good. And I see that you're practicing. I'd like to invite you to come out with our team and have more training. But you have a really good talent." I was impressed because I think in the 8 or 9 months that I was doing it, that was the first time he actually initiated conversation. So he gave me his card, and I went to look at it, and I was knocked back on my behind because his team was the feeder team for the Olympic archers.
Wow.
So, yeah, I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." And so as I was thinking through that, I was thinking about, like, when I first started, I had a lot of talent, but it takes more than talent to get to where you want to be. You have to pair talent with practice, with repetition. And when you do that, you get to a point where talent alone can't take you. So I teach that actually in one of my classes now, is that you do have to pair your natural gifts and abilities with discipline and working at getting to your goals.
That's a terrific story. I love that. And it's really cool to hear you make the analogy, or rather that, sports are often an analogy for life. I grew up doing a lot of sports. I'm a competitive runner now, and I find the same thing. I find that kind of the effort that I put into running really helps me perform actually better in other areas of my life, right? In my relationships, my career. And I think you're right. It is the fact that something like, well, I'd imagine even more so with something as precise as archery, you can't really fake it, right? You can't fake your way through archery. It's going to be pretty obvious. And so, the effort that you put into it, the focus that you put into it is the same focus that often carries over, like I said, into other aspects of the life. So that's really cool. Archery.
Yeah, it's been a while since I moved, but the first place that I usually, when I go to an area, is I look for an archery range because it's one of those things that it brings me pleasure and also stirs my mind for how I can help other people.
And I promise we won't spend the whole time talking about sports here, but I've done some archery in my time, not a whole lot. I wouldn't say that I was a natural like you were at it when I first stepped up there. But one thing that I did notice when I was practicing some archery is that it is a very almost mindful task. It's a type of meditation, right? You really have to kind of get into your own body. You have to be focused precisely on the goal. Every movement needs to be precise. Have you found that, you mentioned it's kind of a almost an escape or a chance for you to kind of let off some steam. Have you found that the practice of it has allowed you to be more focused in other parts of your life as well?
Yeah, it was interesting as my instructor was telling me, because we think you just stand there and you pull your elbow back and you let the arrow fly. He started from my feet and how you place your feet. And then when you pull it back, what happens with each part of your body. So you take a look at some of the mindfulness practices where you're separating different parts in order to concentrate and calm down. That's what you find yourself doing. And I've learned to isolate my rib cage and how that settles, and how I twist this part but not this part. And so when things can get overwhelming, it's a really, really good reminder to say, okay, what can I control? What can I do? And let's get that into focus. Okay, now that I got this into focus, I see where this is going out of control. So this is okay now. Now I can concentrate on that. So yeah, it's absolutely helpful in knowing that you can separate things. And yes, it's the whole body, but sometimes you need to focus on different parts in order to get to your goals.
That's so good. And, the part there on recognizing what's in your control and what's out of your control, and not worrying at all what's out of your control, because after all, it's out of your control.
Absolutely.
And that is big carryover to life. I mean, I experienced the same thing in the most recent ultra marathon I ran. It was like, halfway through it, you're dying, you want to quit. And I just had to remind myself, what is in my control right now? Right. And that same attitude I try to bring to the work. What is in my control? So like I said, we're not going to talk about sports the whole time, but I had to go there with you first, because I was super curious about that. So Akpene, tell me a little bit of a story here. Now, when we were talking in the background, you mentioned a specific client that you were working with recently. Tell the audience that story.
Be happy to, because it's just amazing. It was a path through what I would like everybody to find and realize. I met her at a networking group, and what was really funny about that is that we went to coffee. We just got on real well, and then she scheduled time to meet with me again, and then she told me that, oh yeah, I was telling somebody that my coach was so and so and so and so, and she was telling me this and that, and I was like, wait a minute, who's your coach? And she said, you are. I'm like, oh, okay. All right.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. Let's get the paperwork going and let's move forward. But she was an assistant at a financial company, and she had vision and goals, and she knew she wanted to get there, and she had no clue how she was going to get there, and she knew she needed help. And then shortly after she signed on, she said, yeah, so my family life is a mess. I'm getting divorced, and it's not pretty. So she's going through two of life's biggest stressors, is a change in family and a job change. And so as we were going through the coaching and we were setting goals and all that, one of the biggest things is that she was seeing where she wanted to be, and she was listening to voices around her. And she realized that she needed to know herself. Some of the things that I saw in her, I was speaking into her, that she was very confident, she was very bold, and nobody's ever told her that. In fact, her husband and actually her manager were telling her the opposite. And so as we were going through the coaching, she got her licensing, and she was put in a position where she had to choose whether she would stay with her current company or go with another company. And the other company was a little bit more work, but would pay off in the end. But she was comfortable in her current company. There's a lot of times that we are comfortable where we're at, and she saw the possibilities. And I just encouraged her. I said, this other company looks like they value who you are and what you want to do. Your current company right now says they value, they give lip service, they verbally say they value, but their actions are showing something different. So for a couple of months, she was going back and forth, and then something big happened at her company, and she says, I don't know that I can do this. It's very scary to make the jump, but I think I'll do this. And she said, I think I'll do this because you have been telling me who I am and reminding me that this is what I've wanted for a long time. and I've buried it for decades, actually. And I'm right on the cusp of it. So I'm going to make the jump. And so she went from being an assistant, going through a divorce, to being confident in the divorce management. And so she gained confidence to be able to know, because they had kids, to know what was best for her kids. And then she made the jump into her company and was elevated faster than she could ever imagine. And I just told her, because that's who she is. She was walking in who she was. And so she, after our contract ended, she came back and asked me to speak at one of her events, and she's running several events. She's the lead, one of the lead female financial advisors, one of the lead divorce care advisors. I mean, it's just amazing to see where she is. And she said, I could not have been here if you had not told me who I was and reaffirmed to me who I was. And that just really spoke to me, because that's what I want people to know. I want people to know who they are, and who they are is powerful, and who they are is very capable. So getting all emotional right now. So,
and
yeah.
Understandably so. I mean, my heart is warmed. I mean, that is just a terrific success story. And I also know just, your mission has always been about seeing the potential in people and helping them be who they already are. And I really love that last piece, helping them be who they already are, not shove a square peg in a round hole.
Right.
It's you in your own self, in your own skin, have your strengths and you have your capabilities. And so many of us, myself included, struggle coming into who am I really, right? And how can I be who I already am and use that to my benefit and the benefit of those around me. And so I just think that story is a perfect example of your mission and the work that you do. Akpene, what is your company's name?
It's called Ezer Unfolding.
Ezer Unfolding.
Yeah.
And what does this term Ezer mean?
It's a Hebrew word, and it means help. And what I found so interesting when I was researching it is a lot of the times our association with help is like giving somebody our hand, or it's often paired with help meet. So somebody who can, help support somebody. But when I looked at the reference to the word and how it's used, only a small percentage of the time is it used for just giving a hand or helping people up. I think it was about 60-something% of the time it's used for a military force coming in to help somebody to win a victory. I think that's one of those hit me with a brick type moments. That's something that I do, is I help people with their victories. And it's not just, oh, you did a good job. It's more like, you know who you are. And let me equip you to be who you are. And now let me see you run. Let me see you win. And so that's where that came from. And the unfolding part, again, goes back to, it's already inside of people. Some people just need help unpackaging what's inside of them. So it's unfolding the box around what's already there.
And I know you do a lot of work, like you said, around helping people understand who they are, not only in life, but in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
And helping them understand a bit how they show up.
Absolutely.
And this is definitely a common interest of ours. So why is it important that people understand who they are, that people understand their own personalities, as well as the personalities of those around them?
I think it's really important to know your strengths, but also to know what you can't do or what you're not good at doing. Several scenarios here. So if you don't understand your strengths, and I teach on this term, it's connected, I promise you. I teach on this term called humility and being humble. And people think being humble is thinking less of yourself. In all actuality, being humble is knowing who you are. And once you know who you are, you have the humility to know, I can do this for you. I can help you out because I know my strengths. I see your weaknesses and I want you to succeed. So I'm going to add my strength to your weakness. That is a different connotation of humility than we currently think in our mindset right now. Our humility is, oh, think less of me instead of thinking what I can do can help you succeed. And so knowing who you are, knowing your personality, knowing your tendencies, you are, first of all, more able to do what you can do. And then you recognize what you can't do and you stop doing the stupid, is what I call it. Is that if you know that you're not good at something, then stop trying to make that better. You can mitigate it. Like if you do something horrible, like for instance, when I started my business, I did all my bookkeeping and all that stuff. I can do it. It takes a lot longer for me to do it, but I can do it. One of my first hires, though, was a bookkeeper because that's not my strength. I spend more time doing my books than I was doing my coaching client. So knowing your personality knows, okay, let's figure out our strengths and let's figure out our weaknesses. And if you know your personality, one thing I tell people is that then you figure out you're not broken. You're not a failure. You've just been trying to shove a round peg in a square hole. Mm-hmm. So let's find your round hole to put your round peg in. And you realize when you can do that and you can do that easily, you're like, oh, I'm not a failure. And your confidence is boosted. Your self-esteem is boosted because you realize you can do something and you can go that much further.
That is terrific. And I totally agree. Right. And it, as you were talking, it dawned on me that obviously it's important to understand your own personality so you can understand your own strengths and maybe your own limitations. And it seems, just from my perspective of working with leaders, it's really important that leaders also help their people that they lead understand who they are so they can put them in a position where they can maximize their strengths, right?
Oh my goodness, yes. I think a good leader will recognize and know, okay, I have this team around me and I don't need to be the best at everything in order to lead the team. I need to be good at relating to people and bringing the best out in my team in order for our team to excel. I think that's really, really important for leadership to understand and know.
Now, in your work, what tools do you use to help people better kind of understand, uncover their core personalities and therefore understand their strengths?
Yeah. So I use a lot the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI. I also advise people to use the Clifton Strengths. I love the Clifton Strengths. And the DISC personality is really great for the workplace. I think that's really good for collaboration, knowing how you collaborate with one another. Oh, I just started studying the Enneagram. I think it's new to me, but I think it's helpful in knowing kind of where you're coming from. MBTI, your Myers-Briggs is like what you do, your motivations, how you act right now. Enneagram, a lot of, okay, what are your core values? What are your fears and what motivates you?
And do you often use kind of a multi-pronged approach when working with people? Like, let's do the Myers-Briggs. Let's also do the Strength Finder.
Yes. I think there are people who swear by this one or that one or the other. It's a starting block. So it's a framework. It's not a box to put people in. So the more information that you have, the more that you can tell. Like I said, I've done Myers-Briggs for a long time, but as I pull in my Clifton Strengths, I understand some of why I do what I do and how that relates. I try not to limit myself to one, because if I limit myself to one, I find that some of my clients will limit themselves to, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I'm bad at. And then they use it as an excuse. And I don't like excuses. So,
and I think you hit on a key point there, that all these tools, they're ultimately frameworks, right?
Yes.
And frameworks are basically a way to help describe who you might be in very, very simple terms, right? And there's an emphasis on the simple terms. So when I do our, behavior style workshops, right? There's 4 different behavioral styles, and everybody has, their primary and their secondary, and then they have their tertiary, of course. And the one thing I always try to get across is we're not trying to put you in a box here. We understand the nature of a framework is that it is simplistic. But what it can help do is provide certain clues, right? Certain realizations of those kind of aha moments of, oh, yeah, that describes me. That makes sense why I process this way as opposed to my colleague who processes very different. So they're frameworks, but there's a lot of exploration that you need to do with them after you have kind of a basic understanding of where you fall in that framework.
Yeah. And I find that people need guides and rules and regulations. And some people cling to them more so than others. And so sometimes when you give this framework to somebody, they say, oh, so this is what I do. So this is why I can't do this. And this is why I can do this. And like you said, it's a starting off point. It's an exploration point, especially with teams, when you're working in teams, when you're working in collaboration.
Well, that's exactly right. It's super simple, but unless it's on their radar, they're not thinking about these things. And I mean, if I had a dollar for every time I saw this in the workplace, I'd probably be a rich man. But the idea that this person just kind of sucks, and that's because they don't do things the way I would do things. So therefore, they're not doing it right. They're incompetent. But once you can help people understand not only the way they show up and process, for instance, and the way other people show up and process, okay, now we just understand that when they talk to think, they're not just trying to be annoying. That is how they process, compared to me, who I'll take longer pauses. And, I have been interpreted as maybe I'm just not interested or I'm disengaged, but no, I'm processing. So it's great to understand how you show up. But the benefit of these is you also understand how and why other people show up, and you can then align people in their strengths based on how they might show up. And I know we keep coming back to this word process and how people process. Obviously, a key component to understanding, personalities and behavior in the workplace is understanding how people process information in their own respective ways. In your frameworks that you use, or when you coach individuals, what are the different processing style frameworks that you use, and how do those styles show up in a workplace context or beyond?
So one popular one that people keep asking me nowadays is about the introversion extraversion scale. I could talk about that all day long because it's more than just, and I know that you know this, it's more than just people who are friendly and people who are shy, because then you have some weird combinations of shy extroverts and then people who are very well-spoken introverts, and to the point where it can be very misleading. There's also within the Myers-Briggs, the way you process is you're intuitive as opposed to your sensory people. You're intuitive, who can take a look at patterns of the way things are and actually get information from that, as opposed to people who need to see, hear, they need to tangibly process information. And so you have people on one end of this spectrum who they need to process, like we were saying, they need to think about things, and they need to think about things inside their head for a little while before giving feedback. And then you have people that you can give them a topic and then they can just talk about it for 20 minutes. So you have those two ends of the spectrum, and then you have people who fall in between. So if you're one of my previous supervisors used to do this, it's like, okay, we're having a meeting. Here's the agenda. And like at the beginning of the meeting, and they go to point one, and you're like, okay, what do you think about this? So you have two or three people talking, and then the other people who aren't talking are still trying to process. We just got an agenda about this subject, and I'm trying to think about, okay, what is my involvement and all that stuff. So they're not talking. There's no input, and then they come to a conclusion that they come to later and say, I don't think that's right because this, this, and this. And then the common question is, well, why didn't you speak up in the meeting? And so if you can realize the different ways that people process, you can have an agenda beforehand, and you can actually go to a person. I'd like you to talk about this because this is your specialty. And then you can get all areas of input when you think about how people process. And it's not just for meetings, it's also for day-to-day things. How many times have you been in the office and somebody comes whizzing by and say, hey, I'm about to go here and I need this, and this piece of information. And somebody is like, uh, uh, they know that it's what they're doing, but they've been working on something else, and it takes them a little while to change their thought process. And it doesn't mean they're slow. It doesn't mean they're stupid. It means that they've just been completely immersed in what they were doing before. So it's understanding, okay, if I need information from John, then I'm going to need to give him a heads up. That'll totally alleviate some of the anxiety, and they get the information that they need. So knowing how you process and then knowing how your workmates process will completely transform a workplace.
And I've seen it transform a workplace, and I'm sure you have as well. I mean, there's certain traps that I see leaders especially fall into when they're not having an eye on the different behavioral styles and specifically the different processing styles, right? Imagine a situation where, like you said, okay, well, we show up at a meeting and the leader of the group says, okay, we have to make a decision on this right now. What do you all think? Right. And like you said, what I would call kind of more the expedients, they're processing out loud, right? They're throwing out a bunch of ideas. All the expedients are just kind of chatting amongst each other. And then the processors, they're processing, right? And at the end of the meeting, the leader says, great. Well, it sounds like we heard from who we needed to hear from, and we're making a decision. Well, that leads to those processors just really feeling burned, right? Which is a morale killer in the end, right? Now, take a different situation where the leader understands behaviors of the group. Well, in that case, they might say maybe a couple days before, even a day before, send out a communication. Here's a decision I would like us to make in tomorrow's meeting. I'd like you to think about this in advance. Now, the expedient people may just read it and be like, okay, well, I'll think about it when I'm in the meeting. Right. That's fine. But the processors are saying, okay, well, now I've had a chance to really kind of dwell on this for a while. And then they can come to the meeting and have the opportunity to really share what they've processed. And, and on that same note, if a leader's aware of the processing styles in the group and all of the expedients are talking, at that point, she can say, well, great, I've heard from you, Ethan or Akpene. What are you thinking? Right? Because they sometimes get shut out of meetings unless a leader is being intentional about calling on them, because they do have thoughts. They do have opinions. Imagine that.
Yeah, they do. And it's as you say, the expedients are talking so much that the internal processors are like, okay, well, there's no room for me. One thing that I saw in the meeting that I thought was absolutely brilliant was sometimes something comes up and people want to process it in that moment, which is okay. But I saw the leader say, okay, this is a thing that we need to do. What I need everybody to do is take the next 5 minutes and write out pros and cons and all that. So it was silent for 5 minutes. Made the expedients very uncomfortable. But at the end of 5 minutes, everybody had something to bring to the table. I mean, people say, well, you can't always send an agenda a day before or something just comes up really quickly. But yeah, you can actually make room in the meeting to deal with things and deal with multiple types of processors so that you can get everybody's input.
Yeah, that is a brilliant tool. And, what we try to do on this podcast, of course, is give managers and leaders and really anybody actionable tools. And I think for our listeners, that's one right there, right? If you're leading meetings and hopefully you have a diverse group of people, making the room with the tool of saying, take 5 minutes on this, right? Process to yourself. And the expedients may be tapping their foot, kind of waiting for this to be over. But ultimately what that leads to is better decisions, right? When you have all the voices in the room heard, you're going to ultimately lead to better decisions. And I've had leaders push back and say, our meetings need to be efficient. We just need to talk about it quickly and be done. Well, as the old adage goes, sometimes you have to slow down to speed up, right? And those processors, they have a lot of great ideas and you need to give them that opportunity. So I think that tool right there, hey, take 5 minutes out of a meeting, do a pros and cons, or even just journal on what you're thinking about this. And I can also see you could do that in advance, right? You could say, here's what I want us to process ahead of time, spend some time before the meeting, journal on it. And again, you'll ultimately lead to better decisions. Have you seen that as well, as far as, the decisions that are made are usually better?
Yeah. Again, I go back to this one organization where the leader was very expedient. He put me in charge of the staff development for 1 year. And I actually saw his legs just going 10 miles a minute as I put out something and I said, I don't want anybody to say anything right now. You can hear his leg going up and down. It was really, really funny. But at the end of it, people that hadn't talked in a group setting before in the past 6 months, they actually had things to say. And he saw the value of stepping back and allowing people to process and not try to get immediate answers. And it was eye-opening for me that people didn't understand. And it was eye-opening for him to realize that people don't always have things at the top of their head just to speak all the time. And so he started, it was hard for him. It was very hard for him because that's just how he is. But he started to be able to implement more thinking times in the meetings. And I was very impressed. I was impressed that he was able to do that when it was so contrary to his nature.
That's a great example. I've seen this before. It's not common, but I've seen it where I walk into a group and I realize everybody here are expedients. And the leader that hired all these people, him or her is also expedient. What's going on there? And this is why it's another reason why it's super important to understand these frameworks and have them in the back of your mind, right? Because what ends up happening is that leader will just end up hiring people that are just like her over and over again, right? And unfortunately, I've heard people not get a job because the interviewers said, well, he wasn't quick on his feet in the interview, right? He wasn't quick. And I just think that's so unfortunate, because is it a value that people have to be quick on their feet here? Or are you just kind of projecting yourself on other people and saying, well, I would be a lot quicker, so why aren't they? So I'm not hiring them. And then all of a sudden you have this homogenous group. And as you know, and as you do a lot of work on, different personalities bring different things to the table. And you want a diverse group of people of opinions and styles and personalities and backgrounds. And so keeping this on the back of your mind is so important when it comes to hiring, because we do know that, the research shows that diverse teams tend to perform higher than homogenous teams.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much brought to the table in a diverse team. And yes, so-and-so may think like me, but so-and-so thinks like me. So there's a perspective that's lost. I teach leaders, it's like, if you have a group where everybody's agreeing, then you need a different group. They're like, wait, what? I was like, if you have come to your decision in 5 seconds flat and everybody agrees with the solution, I need you to ask somebody else who disagrees with you.
Another piece of really great advice. I love that. I'm going to steal that, actually, if that's okay with you, right? Absolutely. If you're in a group and everybody always tends to agree or process the same way you process, you probably need to bring in some different people to the group, right? Because again, going back to things like decisions, that's how better decisions are made, when people have different ideas about things and different ways of processing information, right? And then you can see the issue from all different angles.
Right.
Say you're coaching somebody that is what I'm calling a processor, right? Someone that might think to talk, someone that might be slower to respond, someone that may state their opinions more moderately, speak more cautiously, perhaps. How do you coach them to better work with those in the workplace that are the opposite of them, that are those expedients? Do you have any kind of key things you work on with them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I help them see is a lot of the times they won't speak because they don't feel like their ideas are good enough. And so a lot of the times is just convincing them that even though that people have different ideas, go ahead and speak up. Even when it feels like the conversation's coming to a close, nobody else has anything to say. Well, actually, go ahead and put that in and write it down. Get a paper and pencil and get it from this side of your eyeballs to this side of your eyeballs. And then when you do, you're able to frame your idea a lot better. And I think sometimes that's a lot of the fear, is that I have this thing swirling in my head and I don't know how to express it. So those are some of the two big things, is to actually go ahead and speak up and write things down when you're in the meeting, because when you write things down, you're actually able to verbalize them better.
Another great actionable tool, and I can definitely relate to that. I notice that I think best when I can write stuff down, right? Mm-hmm. And when I'm writing notes in a meeting, I can then refer back to those pieces as I've been kind of processing them throughout the meeting. Yeah. Now, when you're, say you're working with the other group of people, and I'm saying groups of people, this is a very broad framework here. It's a continuum. But if you're working with somebody that is more on that expedient side, right? They might talk to think, they might be quick to respond. They tend to speak assertively, make dynamic first impressions. When you're working with those people, how do you help them either kind of maximize their talents there, or, work more effectively with people that are on the other side of that continuum than them?
I talk to them about relationship building. If they're in the same workspace, go and visit somebody, have coffee, have lunch with somebody who doesn't speak up very often. Because when they do and they go one-on-one, they'll actually hear more about what's in their head. So in the meeting, you can say, oh, I was actually talking to Ethan the other day, and he said this. Ethan, why don't you share? And especially for leaders too. If the leaders, I think I actually just read this either on your blog or your dad's blog, about interacting with people on your team, so that when it comes to the meeting, you can, like I said before, is there anything else? Most leaders wait an average of 4 seconds before moving on. And so making more space for people to, oh, nobody else is talking? Oh, I guess I have my opportunity to talk. Or again, having already talked to somebody, bring them, say, okay, I think you were working on this and you said something about this before. Can you tell the rest of the group what you told me? So it's being aware of other people's processing tools and bringing them out. It may be uncomfortable for them, but you're also bringing out their ideas, which is sorely, sorely needed. And as a leader, you want to be able to bring that to the table.
That is so important. And that, brings us back to the soapbox that myself and the rest of our team often gets on, which is, as a leader, as a manager, having regularly scheduled one-on-one meetings with each and every one of your direct reports. For all the reasons you really just said, these one-on-one meetings that I'm talking about are less about tasky stuff, right? Less about how, following up, how are you doing with this? I need you to do this. This is about relationship building. Yeah. This is about understanding, who is this person across from me? What do they bring to the table, right? How do they process? What ideas do they have? Yeah. And when you have that individual relationship and you're doing, a monthly one-on-one with everybody, well, now you're equipped with the tools to do what you said in a meeting, say, hey, Akpene, I remember that you had some really interesting ideas about this topic. Would you mind sharing that? That can't happen unless you're spending dedicated one-on-one time with each individual and getting to know them. And so it's so important for a leader to have those meetings. And one of the reasons is, again, understanding the personalities, right? Understanding the personalities of the team. So you can kind of be the air traffic controller and say, all right, now your turn to speak on this. This is you have some great insights on this, and so on and so forth. So I love that insight. I think that's a key takeaway.
And I think both types of leaders, expedients and processors, can learn from that. Expedients will want to be doing something and thinking that it might not be the best use of their time, and it's actually one of the best use of their time. Processors may want to be actually, down in the weeds doing something else, and preferably not talking to people, but they actually need to be able to get out of their shell and talk to their team. So I think it's a compromise on both ends. Not one or the other won't do it better. It's something that just needs to happen.
Right. Now, I also understand and believe that another key component to working effectively with others is understanding the different triggers of people, right? What triggers me It might not be exactly what triggers you, right? So let me just ask you, what situations, say in a workplace context, tend to kind of irk you, tend to kind of trigger you, if you're comfortable going there?
I am. I just have to be careful that I don't stand on my 5 foot tall soapbox sometimes. One of the biggest triggers for me is what I heard termed a long time ago as to twatty. And that term is, that's the way we've always done it. Say that to me, and I think my skin color turns red, because I don't believe in that. That's the way we have always done it. I believe in looking back. I believe in, okay, this worked for a time. Let's ask questions. Why did it work? Why was it expedient at the time? Is it still useful? What are other tools that we're using now that can actually change the way that we've done things? That's one thing, and I keep hearing it, and I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? No. I need you to ask questions and not just accept, well, that it worked before, so it's going to work now. No, stop it. So I'm sorry. That's a huge trigger of mine.
I can tell I've triggered you. I'm sorry. No. That makes sense. And again, people are going to be triggered by different things. For someone else, to say, well, that's just the way we've always done it. They might say, okay, well, no big deal then. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I also think an important part here when working with other people is not only understanding what triggers them, but understanding how they show up when they're triggered, right? Mm-hmm. What are their reactions when they're feeling tension, when they're feeling triggered, right? So when I talk about behavioral styles, again, we talk about 4 different styles. There's the analyzer, conductor, promoter, listener. In the workshops, we discuss how might you be able to recognize, for example, that an analyzer is feeling a lot of tension, right? Because that's important to understand if somebody is feeling a tension in a situation, right? So for an analyzer, when they're feeling a lot of tension, they might tend to nitpick, or they might tend to just leave the situation, or they tend to kind of withhold emotions is another thing. Right now, compare that, shut down, and compare that to someone on kind of the opposite corner of this, 4-box framework, a promoter, right? A promoter, when they're feeling tension, how that might show up is they might start debating more, right?
Yes,
or they might
aggressive.
start talking about everything, or they might just kind of overreact to a situation, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you can understand the different tension points and how those show up, well, you can now recognize, all right, there might be a conversation that needs to be had here, because clearly I've done something to cause some tension with this analyzer that I work with. But how do you think about the different ways tensions show up? Have you noticed that there are kind of key ways that the different types of people show up in that kind of tension point or fear state?
Yeah. A lot of the times when I'm in a meeting, I see body language before the verbal ever happens. And a lot of times you'll see fidgeting. Sometimes you'll see this shutdown where there's like emptiness in the eyes, or they're just looking, or maybe taking notes, but not really taking notes. And you can tell. So the body language is a lot of the times the biggest indicator. Some people shrink into themselves. Some people actually try to fill the space more. And so, okay, there's a triggering moment happening. Let's try to figure out what's going on. A lot of times I'll see it and I'll call it before it gets to words. And I'll say, okay, I noticed that you are looking uncomfortable, or I noticed that you are disengaging. Tell me what's going on. What's happening? And so if you can, a lot of times if you can get it before it gets to words, it's a lot easier to talk about, okay, this is happening. I don't think this is right. And this is why I'm coming it from this stance. And it helps people understand, oh, okay. But a lot of times I depend on the body language, because people will show you what they're feeling long before they'll tell you what they're feeling. And so I'll learn to read that. But that once it gets to the words, then you have to learn how to diffuse it. I noticed that you're feeling this way, or you seem to be doing this, and have them explain where they're coming from. Always follow up afterwards. Don't leave anybody hanging that you've noticed, either withdrew or, went away in anger or something like that. But you always want to close that loop.
Circling back around, another major reason why understanding the styles on your team is so important, right? Because if I don't understand the styles, and I see, and my style, say, for example, is when I'm feeling tension, when I feel triggered, I'm going to just, talk a lot. I'm going to debate with you about it, right? Now, if I'm working with an analyzer who might kind of tend to, turn inwards when there's conflict or tension, well, I might not recognize that there's tension there because I just think everybody, when they feel tension, they just debate like me.
Right.
And so I think it's so important to understand the styles so you understand the different tension points.
Again, it's knowing who you are and then knowing who's on your team. So that when you see people displaying this behavior, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, no, there's an issue right now. But you can't understand that until you've gotten into the self-identifying stage.
And what's interesting on the kind of the trigger points or tension points is, when I've looked at the social science, what they find is, each style has their tension reactions, but when they're in kind of maxed out tension mode, like they are really kind of on overdrive with the tension, those styles can tend to do the opposite. They flip, right?
Yeah.
So for
that's when you're in trouble.
You're in trouble. Yeah. You're in trouble. And that's super important to recognize.
Yeah. Your processor, your analyzer has withdrawn, and then all of a sudden he's exploding. You're like, oh, I missed that sign. Like big time. Yeah.
It's like, what's going on there? Yeah, exactly right. So with our analyzers and the behavioral style framework that we use, it's like, okay, so an analyzer, they're feeling tension. Again, they might nitpick, withhold emotion, but when there's a high level of stress, they become more emotional, which you're like, wow, where did this person come from? Right.
Yes.
And for, our listeners in their tension mode, they might tend to wait too long to act. They might tend to tell others kind of behind the scenes. They might tend to just give in. But when they're really stressed, they actually get angry or they blow up, which is the opposite.
Opposite of the listener. Yeah, absolutely.
And our promoters, again, they might debate more. They might overreact if they're feeling a lot of tension. But if they reach the high level of tension, that you could tend to see, exactly, no emotion, right? Or they just walk away, which they never do unless they're feeling that way. And then the last one is our conductors. When they're feeling tension, they might get mad, they might blame, they might dictate, they might override emotions. But with that high level of stress, they might just give in, kind of just like, whatever, kind of whatever, do whatever you want, right? Akpene, we might have to do a round 2 at some point because I know there's so many more topics that we really should talk about. We have a lot of overlapping interests, but this was a lot of fun. And I think we gave our listeners, I think we gave our listeners some pretty cool tools here to start thinking about personalities in the workplace, start thinking about tension points. But besides that, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience? Any message, tool, insights you'd like them to know about?
I would encourage doing the personality or the motivational tools for their teams, just to be aware that it's not a box to put people in, but it's something to help leverage your collaborative power. I think that's really, really important in leadership, and also being people-centered. I think you say it in your blogs a lot, is pay now or pay later. You absolutely need to invest in your team. The quicker that you invest in your team, the quicker that you get your team together, the faster that you can move forward, even ahead of your competitors. And always be people-centered. In this day and age where there's a lot of automation, and don't get me wrong, I'm a processor. I have a process background, project management background. I love systems. I love policies. I love procedures. People always come first. So if you find your policies and procedures coming before people, then you do need to reassess what's going on.
Well, I think that's a great note to leave it on. And I truly echo everything you just said there. I mean, that to me is the definition of leading with mind and heart, right? People coming first. They're your greatest asset and they're the ones that are going to carry everything forward. So I love that. Thank you so much. Where could people learn more about you?
Yeah, I have my website, ezerunfolding.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn, and I have some courses coming up that talk about interpersonality, interactions, and things like that. So that's where I am.
I love it. I will post your website and your LinkedIn page in the show notes so people can find it right there.
But it's been a joy. I love this conversation. I think more people need to be having this conversation. So thank you, Ethan and your dad, for doing this.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Again, this is Akpene Torku Sims. Go check her out. She does excellent work. And besides that, have a great rest of your day, folks.